So the drum rack is probably one of my favorite things in the entire world. If you go to your drums folder in the browser, then you can see there's a drum rack device right here, and that's a blank drum rack. And then we have all these different presets of drum racks with samples and drums built for you. So for now, I'm just going to grab a preset, because one of the best ways to learn, I think, is just to kind of dive in and just use some of the presets Ableton has. So let's throw it into this MIDI track. And starting off right away, we have three main areas to look at, which you looked at, and we will look at in some more videos in the future. But we have kind of what's a box in a box in a box type of thing. We have these macro controls on the left. And if I open up this chain, we've got three different views. We've got this macro view with these 8 knobs, we have the chain view, and we have our devices view. So over here, we're looking at the device, and that device is inside this chain. And this chain is allowing us to hold the device, so everything's playing through this chain, and then we can assign these chains to the macro knobs over here. And so first of all, we have different controls, and they're mapped inside the drum rack, which could be anything. And we can later on learn how to macros to whatever parameter we want. So let's just close out some of these views to clean it up, because we're just going to look at this area with all the samples inside the drum rack in this area. So immediately I've got these different samples. You can hold 128 samples in a drum rack. If I click on any of these samples, there's this little play button, you can hit play. And in this drum rack, each one of those samples in the drum rack has a chain. So we talked about chains earlier. Well, there's actually chains inside the drum rack itself for each individual sample. And like I said, we can hold 128 different samples. So you can build a ton of sounds inside a drum rack and play them back individually and control them in a lot of different ways. So you can click the view over there to see different areas in the drum rack. So we've got some of these sounds, and each one of these cells represents a note value. So we have A sharp, we have B sharp, all these different ones. So if I wanted to arm a track and I start playing on my computer MIDI keyboard or a MIDI controller, you'll notice certain cells are highlighted based on whatever note value I'm hitting. So if I wanted to go up or down an octave to see different cells in the drum rack that samples are assigned to, you hit Z or X on your computer keyboard to go up and down. So if I hit Z, then I can jump between different samples within the octave. So the S is the snare, the A is the kick on my keyboard right now. So we've got more views over here on the left in the drum rack. So let's explore these. If you click I/O, this stands for your in and out preferences, and you'll notice each one of those samples in the chain have a new window that expands. So now, instead of playing C1, say on my MIDI controller or my computer MIDI keyboard, I can change it to any other note I want to accept that sample to be played in the drum rack. We also have what's called choke. So choke is really great for what we looked at in the impulse device video about making things cut in and out. It's called link in the impulse, but let's just look at choke in the drum rack real quick. I'll just record something. And let's play it back and listen to it. You can see all the samples we have in this clip in the drum rack. And I'm going to quantize it. And remember, the shortcut for quantizing is Command U. So remember that. And you can hold down Shift Command U to see the quantized settings and get more surgical on that. So I'm just going to program out this beat real fast. And now everything should be locked into time. So let's go into this clip, and now we can go back in here and back to the choke feature. So we'll set two different samples to the same number in choke, and that will allow them to cut each other in and out, like we looked at a hi-hat. So a hi-hat would open and close. It's a perfect example of the choke feature, but you can do it with any sample really. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the hi-hat to choke number 1, and then this other vocal shout out, I'm also going to assign it to choke 1. So we'll make them cut each other off. and they kind of interact together. And it's a cool way to make samples interact that maybe are just not like one-shot drum samples. So we've got more views over there. We're not going to worry about that right now. If you double click something in the chain, you'll see that there's a simpler device. And if I hit play on the chain, you can see that it's playing in that sample inside the simpler device. We'll talk about the simpler device later. But right now I control this individual sample in the chain in a drum rack. And then I can also control certain controls in the chain, and then I can assign certain things into a macro control. So there's a lot of control in a drum rack. But I'm going to have the vocal interact with the hi-hat with that choke feature I showed you. So let's play with that. So I'm just throwing in some random notes here. Well, I have no idea if they'll sound good or not. We'll find out. So as these hi-hats are being played, that vocal part's going to come in. Even though the note's not drawn out really long and it's really short, it's still going to play all the way through whenever that MIDI note hits. So the hi-hat is actually going to cut that vocal part off. And because that vocal part is set to choke as the same number as the hi-hat, when the hi-hat hits, the vocal sample is going to be cut off right away. Otherwise, it would keep playing out. It's a really dope way to make things interact and cut each other in and out. You get the idea, hopefully. So more options inside the chain in the drum rack. We have the volume. So you can turn down the volume here within each individual sample in the chain. So maybe that vocal's too loud. I can adjust that. Turn the hi-hat up or down. And make that vocal a lot quieter. And then next door, we also have some panning options. So you could pan things left and right. And when I'm programming drums, like I mentioned earlier, you don't typically want things all down the middle. It'd be like stacking 3 drummers sitting on each other's lap, playing live, and having the entire band just on top of each other. It'd be weird. So typically I'll pan like the snare just a little bit to the left or right, have the hi-hat a little farther to the left and the right, cymbals panned off to the sides, because a good mixing engineer or a good producer is going to create depth in the mix. So you want it to be dimensional as much as it is just audible and make people feel like they're in a room. So the drum rack allows you to do that with panning and with other features inside Live, which we'll talk more about in a mixing course later on. So now you're creating space by panning all these things. So next door, we also have the mute and solo for each individual chain or sample. And then we have our handy dandy hot swap, which we've already talked about. So you can click that and swap out samples in the drums folder in the browser. So hopefully that gives you an idea of working inside the drum rack. We'll go a little deeper in the next video, and thanks for watching.